There's a moment in no contact that feels different from everything that came before it. The moment when your silence is met with their silence. No messages, no check-ins, no effort from either side, and at first it can feel confusing, even unsettling, because you're so used to someone carrying the connection, even if it was mostly you. But now there's nothing, just space, just stillness, and in that stillness something powerful begins to happen, because when silence meets silence, there's no one left to maintain the illusion. Before, even if things felt off, even if the effort wasn't equal, the connection continued because someone was keeping it alive. Conversations were happening, even if they were one-sided. The bond felt present, even if it wasn't being equally nurtured. But now, without that constant interaction, the reality of the connection is exposed. Not what it seemed like, not what you hoped it could be, but what it actually is when no one is trying to force it. This is where truth begins to surface. Because a real connection doesn't rely on one person's effort to exist. It has a natural pull, a mutual desire to stay connected, a balance that doesn't require constant pushing. But when both sides go silent and nothing moves, it raises a deeper question. Was the connection ever as strong as it felt? Or was it being sustained by effort rather than genuine reciprocity? At the same time, this silence removes distractions. There are no messages to analyze, no mixed signals to decode, no temporary moments of attention to hold on to. And without those distractions, you're left with clarity. You begin to see things more objectively. You start to recognize patterns you may have ignored before. You realize how much of the connection depended on consistency that wasn't coming from both sides. But this silence isn't just revealing the truth about the connection. It's also revealing something about you. Because as you sit in it, you begin to understand your own strength. You realize that you don't have to break the silence to feel okay. You don't have to reach out just to feel a sense of control. You can exist in this space without rushing to change it. And that's where growth begins. It's not easy. There will be moments where you want to reach out, where you question if staying silent is the right choice. But every time you hold that silence, you allow reality to speak louder. You give the connection a chance to show its true nature without interference. And that truth, whether it's what you hoped for or not, is what sets you free from confusion. So when silence meets silence, don't be afraid of it. Because in that quiet space, the truth finally has room to be seen. In the beginning of mutual silence, something subtle but powerful takes over before anything else. Not always in an obvious or negative way, but in a quiet internal voice that says, I'm not reaching out first. It becomes less about the connection and more about protecting pride, avoiding rejection, and maintaining a sense of control. Both sides feel it. Both sides may be thinking about each other, wondering what the other is doing, but neither wants to be the one to break the silence. At first, this can feel like strength, holding back, staying silent, not giving in to the urge to reach out. It can seem like you're in control of your emotions, and in some ways, you are, but there's a fine line between emotional strength and ego-driven resistance. Because when silence is guided by ego, it's not about clarity or self-respect. It's about fear. Fear of being ignored, fear of looking weak, fear of caring more than the other person. And this is where things become complicated. Because while ego keeps both people silent, it also delays the truth from coming to the surface. Instead of acting from genuine feeling, both sides may stay stuck in a waiting game. Who will reach out first? Who will give in? Who cares more? And during this time, emotions can get buried under layers of pride and hesitation. But as time passes, ego starts to lose its hold. The initial resistance fades, and something deeper begins to take its place. The silence becomes less about winning and more about feeling. You start to notice what's underneath that pride. Do you actually miss them? Or do you just miss the attention? Do you want to reach out because you care? Or because you're uncomfortable with the silence? These questions begin to surface, and they shift your perspective. At the same time, the other person is likely going through a similar process. Their silence may have started from the same place, pride, hesitation, But as the quiet stretches on, they too are faced with their own thoughts and emotions. And eventually, ego can no longer fully mask what's real, because genuine emotion has a way of pushing through no matter how much we try to suppress it. This is why this phase is so important. It reveals the difference between a connection driven by ego and one driven by true feeling. Because if ego is the only thing keeping both sides silent, then once it fades, someone will feel the urge to reach out. But if nothing changes, if the silence remains even after the ego settles, then that silence is no longer about pride. It's about a lack of deeper connection. So don't confuse silence with strength right away. Sometimes it's just ego holding space. But eventually the truth beneath it will always rise. As the silence continues and the initial layer of ego begins to fade, something deeper starts to take its place: awareness. Not the kind that comes from constant communication, but the kind that grows in stillness. When there are no messages, no distractions, no temporary moments of connection, the mind begins to turn inward, and in that quiet space, emotions that were once hidden or ignored start to rise to the surface. At first, it may feel like overthinking. You replay conversations, remember small details, question what went wrong, and wonder what the other person is feeling. But this process isn't just confusion, it's reflection. It's your mind trying to make sense of the connection without relying on immediate feedback. And as time passes, that reflection becomes more honest, more grounded, and more revealing. You begin to notice patterns you didn't fully acknowledge before. You recognize where you were giving more than you were receiving. You see moments where you ignored your own feelings just to keep things going. And at the same time, you may also start to appreciate what was real. The genuine moments, the connection that did exist, the parts that mattered. This balance of clarity is what emotional awareness truly looks like. And while this is happening within you, something similar is likely happening on the other side. Silence has a way of forcing people to think, even if they try not to at first. Without constant interaction, there's nothing to distract from the absence. And absence creates presence in a different way. It brings attention back to what's missing. The other person may begin to feel that gap, to question it, to reflect on their own actions and feelings. This is where emotions become clearer, because when you're constantly talking, it's easy to stay on the surface. Conversations can fill the space without ever going deep. But when everything stops, there's no way to avoid what's underneath. If there are genuine feelings, they start to grow stronger in the silence. Missing someone becomes more real when you can't reach them. Thinking about them becomes more frequent when there's no new interaction to replace those thoughts. But there's another side to this awareness as well. Sometimes the silence doesn't strengthen feelings, it reveals their absence. As time goes on, you may notice that the emotional intensity begins to fade instead of grow. The attachment loosens. The need to reach out becomes less urgent. And that realization is just as important, because it shows you that what you felt may not have been as deep or lasting as you once believed. This is why silence is such a powerful teacher. It doesn't just show you what you feel. It shows you how strong those feelings really are when there's nothing feeding them. So allow that awareness to develop, because in that quiet reflection, the truth of your emotions will become impossible to ignore. As the silence stretches on and emotions settle into something clearer, another shift begins to take place. That isn't always obvious on the surface, but is powerful underneath. It's the shift of emotional strength. Because when both people are silent, the connection is no longer being influenced by who texts first or who tries harder. Instead, it's influenced by who is more grounded, more centered, and less dependent on the outcome. At the beginning, silence can feel like a test of patience. You might find yourself checking your phone, wondering if they'll reach out, questioning what they're thinking. Those moments reveal how attached you are to the response. How much of your emotional state is still tied to their actions? But as time passes and you begin to settle into the silence, something changes. You start to feel less reactive. The urge to reach out becomes weaker. The need to immediate answers starts to fade. This is where emotional strength begins to build. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but quietly through your ability to remain steady without external validation. You're no longer being pulled by uncertainty. You're no longer trying to control what happens next. You're simply allowing things to be while staying connected to your own sense of stability. And that kind of energy is powerful because it doesn't depend on anyone else. At the same time, this strength shifts the dynamic of the connection. Even without communication, people can feel when something has changed. When you're no longer chasing, no longer reacting, no longer seeking reassurance, your energy becomes different. It becomes more grounded, more self-contained, and that creates a contrast, especially if the other person is still operating from a place of uncertainty or emotional dependence. In many cases, the person who is less comfortable with the silence will feel it more intensely. They may start to question why you haven't reached out, why the pattern has changed, why they can't predict your actions anymore. And that uncertainty can create a pull. Not because you're trying to attract them, but because your stability highlights their imbalance. But this isn't about winning the silence or proving who cares less. True emotional strength isn't about suppressing feelings or pretending you don't care. It's about feeling everything without letting it control your actions. It's about choosing not to react impulsively, not because of pride, but because of self-awareness. And as you grow into that strength, something important becomes clear. You don't need to break the silence to feel secure. You don't need a response to feel valued. Your sense of self becomes independent of the outcome, and that's what truly shifts everything. So stay grounded in your silence, because the one who holds their center doesn't just endure the distance, they transform within it. As the silence continues and both sides remain distant, the connection reaches a point where it can no longer stay in an uncertain middle. It begins to move in one of two directions. Either it strengthens beneath the surface, or it slowly fades away. And this shift doesn't happen because of words or effort, but because of what the silence reveals over time. At first, it may seem like nothing is happening. Days pass, maybe even weeks, and there's no contact, no clarity, no visible change. But beneath that stillness, something is being tested. Because a real connection doesn't disappear just because communication stops. If the bond is genuine, if there are deeper feelings on both sides, that silence doesn't erase them, it intensifies them. The absence starts to feel heavier, thoughts become more frequent. The urge to reconnect grows stronger, even if it's not immediately acted upon. In that case, silence acts like pressure. It brings hidden emotions to the surface. It forces both people to confront what they truly feel without the distraction of constant interaction. And eventually, that pressure reaches a point where something has to give. One person feels the pull strongly enough to break the silence, not out of habit, but out of genuine desire. And when that happens, the connection that returns often feels more real, more intentional, because it's no longer being carried. It's being chosen. But there's another side to this, one that can be harder to accept. Sometimes the silence doesn't create that pull. Instead, it creates distance. The thoughts become less frequent. The emotional intensity begins to fade. What once felt important starts to feel less urgent. And slowly, without any dramatic moment, the connection loses its presence. Not because something specific ended it, but because there wasn't enough depth to sustain it without constant effort. This is the reality that silence reveals. It shows you whether the bond had a natural strength or whether it depended on continuous attention to survive. And while it can be difficult to watch something fade, it's also a form of clarity. Because holding on to something that only exists when one person is trying is not a true connection. It's a temporary attachment. At the same time, this process changes you. As you observe the connection either strengthen or fade, you begin to understand what you truly want and what you're no longer willing to accept. You become more aware of the difference between something that feels real and something that just feels familiar. So don't rush to break the silence. Because in that quiet space, the connection is either proving its strength or revealing its limits. As the silence continues and everything settles into stillness, you reach the most important phase of all, the moment where clarity replaces confusion. There are no mixed signals anymore, no half conversations, no temporary moments of attention to hold on to. What remains is simple, even if it's not easy to accept. Because when both of you stay silent, you're no longer guessing where you stand. You're seeing it. In the past, you may have tried to read between the lines, to interpret messages, to find meaning in small actions. You looked for signs, for reassurance, for anything that could tell you how the other person truly felt. But now, there's nothing to interpret. The absence of action becomes the message itself. And while silence can feel empty, it actually carries one of the clearest answers you can receive. This is where you begin to understand something important. Effort reveals intention. When someone wants to be in your life, they don't allow silence to stretch endlessly without trying to bridge it. They don't stay distant without reason or explanation. And when there is no effort, no movement, no attempt to reconnect, it tells you something real about their level of investment. Not what they said in the past, not what they promised, but what they're choosing now. And that realization shifts your perspective. Instead of asking, why aren't they reaching out? You begin to ask, what does this show me? You stop focusing on what you don't have and start focusing on what's being revealed. Because clarity isn't always loud. It often comes in quiet, undeniable forms. At the same time, this clarity gives you something you didn't have before. Control. Not control over the other person, but control over your response. You're no longer reacting out of emotion, chasing answers, or trying to fix something that isn't being met halfway. You're responding from awareness. You see the situation for what it is, and that allows you to make a decision that aligns with your self-respect. This is where growth becomes real. Because once you have clarity, you can't go back to pretending you don't see it. You can't unknow what's been shown to you. And while part of you may still want to hold on, another part of you begins to let go. Not out of weakness, but out of understanding, because the truth is, clarity is freedom. It may not always give you the outcome you wanted, but it gives you the direction you need. It shows you whether to open the door again or to close it for good. So accept the silence for what it reveals, because in the absence of words, the truth is already spoken.